Have you ever felt the crushing weight of invisibility, of standing in a crowded room, yet being utterly alone? Today's story plunges deep into the silent suffering of a young immigrant boy whose faith becomes his only companion in a world that refuses to see him. But sometimes the quietest voices carry the most profound truths, truths powerful enough to break through the hardest hearts and remind us that compassion can bloom in the most unexpected places. Matteo clutched his worn leather journal against his chest as laughter echoed through the polished hallway of St. Bartholomew's Academy. His fingers traced the faded gold cross embossed on its cover, a parting gift from his grandmother when they fled Venezuela 7 months ago. The pristine school corridor felt like an ocean away from the dusty streets of Caracas. 12 years of life, and he had never felt more invisible. Behind him, a group of students erupted in laughter. He didn't need to turn around to know they weren't laughing with him. These hallways had rules he couldn't decode, social currencies he couldn't afford. His navy uniform blazer, a second-hand purchase his mother had stayed up 3 nights altering, hung slightly too loose around his slender shoulders. The embroidered school crest felt like a brand, marking him as an outsider. "Hey, new kid!" called a voice. Matteo pretended not to hear, keeping his eyes fixed on the scuffed tips of his shoes, the only pair he owned. Footsteps approached, then retreated, followed by more laughter. The bell rang, a shrill reminder that he was late for English class again. Matteo hurried, his stomach knotting. Dr. Harrison would be waiting, and the thought made his palms sweat. The English teacher had never acknowledged his presence beyond marking him absent or present. 7 months of silence. When he slipped into the classroom, Dr. Harrison didn't look up from his desk. "Take your seat," he said to no one in particular, his voice carrying the weight of 27 years of teaching literature to privileged children who would never fully appreciate Shakespeare or Dickens. Matteo slid into his seat at the back corner, isolated, safe, invisible. Dr. Harrison was a man carved from stone, his silver-streaked dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses complementing the perpetual crease between his eyebrows. His tweed jacket with leather elbow patches had become as much a fixture of the classroom as the yellowing map of literary Britain on the wall. "Today," Dr. Harrison announced, straightening a stack of papers with mechanical precision, "we begin personal narratives. You will write about a moment that changed you, a crucible that forged your character." His eyes swept the room, passing over Matteo as if the space were empty. "Due Monday. 3 pages minimum." While Dr. Harrison distributed the assignment sheets, Matteo opened his journal beneath his desk. Between vocabulary lists and half-finished homework were tiny sketches and prayers, conversations with God when no one else would listen. His fingers found a blank page. "A moment that changed me," he wrote in careful script. The rest of the day passed in a blur of classes, where Matteo spoke only when called upon, which was rarely. In the cafeteria, he sat alone, watching other students huddle in laughing groups while he unwrapped the arepas his mother had prepared before leaving for her second job. The familiar corn smell that once brought comfort now marked him as different. At home, a 2-bedroom apartment shared with his mother, uncle, and 2 cousins, Matteo found solace in the tiny corner of the living room he'd claimed as his own. A wooden crate served as his desk, topped with a lamp missing its shade. His mother found him there when she returned from cleaning offices downtown, her hands raw from industrial cleansers. "How was school today, mijo?" she asked, her accent thick, but her smile warm enough to heat their drafty apartment. "Good," Matteo lied, the word bitter on his tongue. He couldn't tell her how the boy with perfect teeth had knocked his books from his hands, or how the girl with golden hair had mimicked his accent when he'd been forced to read aloud. His mother worked too hard for him to add to her burdens. She kissed the top of his head, her calloused hand gentle against his cheek. "I'm proud of you. Your father would be too." The mention of his father, 3 years gone now, buried in Venezuelan soil, made Mateo's chest ache. He nodded, not trusting his voice. That night, as the apartment grew quiet and the 7-watt bulb cast shadows across his makeshift desk, Mateo opened his journal again and began to write his personal narrative. Not the sanitized version his classmates would produce, but the raw truth of a boy torn from his homeland, carrying nothing but his faith and his father's name. "I was 12 years old when I learned that home is not a place," he wrote. "It's the space between heartbeats where memories live." The words flowed from his pen like a confession, page after page, filled with the story of his father's death from untreated pneumonia, the violence that forced them to flee, the 40 days of their journey north, the crossing that nearly claimed his cousin's life, and the strange new world where he had become invisible. Between paragraphs he sketched his father's hands fixing an ancient radio, his grandmother's kitchen, the border fence, the cross he clutched during the darkest nights of their journey. When he finally set down his pen, the digital clock read 3:17 a.m., and he had filled 12 pages. He fell asleep with the journal open on his chest, dreaming of a classroom where people finally saw him. Morning came too soon. Mateo's uncle drove him to school in his rusted delivery van, Christian radio playing softly in Spanish. Uncle Rafael hummed along, occasionally glancing at his nephew. "Remember what your abuela says," he said as they pulled up to the school. "God did not bring you this far to abandon you now." Mateo nodded, clutching his journal and the carefully typed pages of his assignment. He had spent his lunch money at the library's printing station to make it perfect. English class was after lunch. Mateo spent the morning hours rehearsing what he would say if Dr. Harrison called on him to read. The words he had written felt too intimate, too raw for this sterile classroom, yet something in him needed them to be heard. When he entered the English classroom, he found Dr. Harrison at his desk, eyes fixed on a worn photograph he quickly tucked into his drawer when students began filing in. For a fleeting moment, Mateo caught a glimpse of something unexpected in the teacher's face. Vulnerability, perhaps even grief. "Pass your assignments forward," Dr. Harrison instructed once everyone was seated. Papers rustled as they made their way to the front of each row. When Mateo's turned in his 3 neatly typed pages, he kept his journal hidden in his lap. "Volunteers to read?" Dr. Harrison asked, scanning the room. Several hands shot up, the usual students, confident in their storytelling. Dr. Harrison selected 3 to read their narratives, anecdotes about summer camps, sports victories, and family vacations that had supposedly transformed their young lives. As the final volunteer finished, the teacher nodded perfunctorily. "Thank you. For tomorrow, read chapter 7 of—" "Excuse me, sir?" The words escaped Mateo's lips before he could reconsider. 27 pairs of eyes turned toward him in shock. He had never voluntarily spoken in class before. Dr. Harrison looked equally startled. For the first time, he seemed to actually see Mateo. "Yes?" Mateo's heart hammered against his ribs. May I read mine?" A heavy silence filled the room. The teacher hesitated, then nodded once. "Very well. Be quick about it." Mateo rose from his seat, legs trembling. Instead of his typed assignment, he opened his journal. The classroom blurred around him as he focused on the words he had written in the lonely hours of night. "I was 12 years old when I learned that home is not a place," he began, his accent thicker with nervousness. "It's the space between heartbeats where memories live." As he read, his voice grew steadier. He spoke of his father's death, of streets that became battlefields overnight, of his mother's decision to leave everything behind. He described the journey, walking until his shoes fell apart, hiding from those who would prey on desperate travelers, praying every night with his grandmother's rosary wrapped around his wrist. "We crossed 7 rivers," he read. "My cousin Miguel nearly drowned in the 4th. I pulled him out, while my mother screamed prayers to heaven. That night, I dreamed my father carried us both across the water, his hands strong again, his lungs no longer filled with fluid. Matteo glanced up briefly. The classroom had gone utterly still. Even the boy who had knocked his books away was listening, mouth slightly open. Dr. Harrison sat rigid at his desk, his knuckles white against the edge. Emboldened, Matteo continued, describing their arrival, the strange new foods, the foreign syllables that tangled on his tongue. He spoke of his first day at St. Bartholomew's, of corridors filled with students who looked through him. "I am learning to be invisible," he read from the final page. "But at night, when I pray, I know that God still sees me. My grandmother said faith is believing you are seen when the whole world has turned away. So I believe. I have to. It's the only thing I brought with me that didn't weigh anything." When he finished, Matteo closed his journal. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats before the bell rang, startling everyone. Students gathered their belongings in a daze, casting curious glances his way as they filed out. Matteo returned to his desk, hands shaking as he collected his books. He had exposed too much, revealed the soft underbelly of his pain to predators. Regret washed over him in a cold wave. "Matteo," he looked up. Dr. Harrison stood by his desk, the typed assignment in his hand. For the first time, the teacher had used his name. "Stay a moment." The classroom emptied until only they remained. Matteo stood clutching his journal, ready for reprimand. Dr. Harrison's face was unreadable as he leaned against his desk. "That wasn't the assignment you turned in," he said finally. "No, sir, I'm sorry." Dr. Harrison removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "How many pages did you write in that journal?" 12, sir. And you typed only 3 for the assignment." Matteo nodded, eyes downcast. "Why?" The question hung between them. Matteo traced the cross on his journal's cover. "I thought no one would want to hear all of it." Dr. Harrison was silent for so long that Matteo risked looking up. What he saw shocked him. The teacher's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You're wrong," Dr. Harrison said, his voice rough. He turned abruptly and walked to his desk, pulling open the drawer to retrieve the photograph Matteo had glimpsed earlier. He held it out. In the faded image, a younger Dr. Harrison stood beside a woman with warm eyes and copper skin, her hand resting on the shoulder of a boy about Matteo's age. They stood before a building with a sign in Portuguese. "My wife was Brazilian," Dr. Harrison said quietly. "She and our son, Thomas, were visiting her family in São Paulo 7 years ago when there was a bus accident." His finger traced the outline of the boy in the photo. He would have been 19 this year. Matteo didn't know what to say. He held his journal tighter. "When you and your mother arrived at this school," Dr. Harrison continued, "I requested that you be removed from my class." The confession hit Matteo like a physical blow. "You look so much like him," the teacher whispered. "I couldn't bear it. But the administration refused my request, so I did the next best thing. I tried not to see you at all." Dr. Harrison carefully returned the photograph to his drawer. "I've spent 7 years angry at God for taking my family. And then you stand there, having lost everything, still believing you are seen." A single tear tracked down his weathered cheek. How? The question wasn't rhetorical. Matteo recognized it as the desperate plea it was. "My grandmother says faith is like breath," Matteo answered softly. "You don't have to think about it for it to keep you alive, but if you focus on it, it can calm the storm inside you." Dr. Harrison nodded slowly, as if absorbing a profound truth from a sage rather than a 12-year-old immigrant. He wiped his cheek with embarrassment and cleared his throat. "I'd like to read all 12 pages, if you're willing to share them." Matteo hesitated, then extended his journal, the repository of his prayers, dreams, and memories. "I can type them properly." "No," Dr. Harrison said, accepting the journal with reverence. "I want to read your actual words in your own hand." The following morning, Matteo found a note in his locker. "See me before class. D.H." When he entered the English classroom, Dr. Harrison was waiting, Matteo's journal on the desk between them. The teacher's eyes were rimmed with red, as if he hadn't slept. "I read it all," he said, without preamble. "Twice." Matteo shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry if—" "No." Dr. Harrison interrupted. I'm the one who should apologize. To you and to God. He pushed the journal across the desk. You have a gift, Matteo. Your words. They made me feel something I've been running from for 7 years. From his briefcase, Dr. Harrison withdrew a leather-bound book. This belonged to Thomas. He kept a journal, too. He held it out. I'd like you to have it. The pages are blank. He never got the chance to fill them. Perhaps you can use it when this one is full. Matteo accepted the gift with trembling hands. Thank you, sir. One more thing, Dr. Harrison said, opening his desk drawer. He removed a sheet of paper, a letter on school letterhead. I'm starting a new program, a writing workshop for students with unique perspectives. I've nominated you as our first participant. As Matteo read the letter, hope unfurled in his chest like a dormant flower sensing spring. For the first time since arriving at St. Bartholomew's, he felt something shift, a crack in the wall of his invisibility. When students began filing in for first period, Dr. Harrison did something unprecedented. He placed his hand on Matteo's shoulder in full view of the class. Thank you, he said, loud enough for others to hear, for reminding me why I became a teacher. The gesture was small, but its impact rippled through the classroom. Curious glances became appraising looks. The boy who had knocked away Matteo's books now regarded him with reluctant respect. At lunch, Matteo sat alone as usual, but halfway through his meal a tray clattered down opposite him. A girl with auburn hair and freckles stood there, clutching a battered copy of the Chronicles of Narnia. "You're in Dr. Harrison's class," she said. "I'm Charlotte. I heard you tell a story that made him cry. No one's ever done that before." "I didn't mean to make him cry," Matteo said, uncomfortable with his new notoriety. Charlotte shrugged, sliding onto the bench. "My dad says tears are just prayers too full for words." She pushed the book toward him. "Ever read this? It's about finding another world when this one doesn't make sense." Before Matteo could answer, 2 more students joined their table, then another. By the end of lunch, he had spoken more words than in all his previous 7 months combined. After school, Dr. Harrison found Matteo waiting for his uncle's van. "I've been thinking about what you said about faith being like breath," the teacher said, hands deep in his pockets. "I haven't been breathing properly for a long time." Matteo nodded, understanding more than a 12-year-old should about grief. "Would you and your mother consider joining my wife's old church group this Sunday?" Dr. Harrison asked. "I haven't gone since, well, it's been 7 years, but maybe it's time." The invitation hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. "I think my mother would like that very much," Matteo said finally. "She's been looking for a church home." Dr. Harrison smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I'll pick you up at 10. As Uncle Raphael's van rattled into the school driveway, Dr. Harrison handed Matteo a book. "We're reading this next. I thought you might want a head start." The copy of A Tale of Two Cities was well worn, its margins filled with annotations in a precise hand. Inside the cover, an inscription, "For my Thomas, who taught me to see the world through new eyes. Love, Dad." "Sir, I can't—" "Please," Dr. Harrison said quietly. "Books are meant to be read. Stories are meant to be shared. It's been sitting on my shelf too long." Uncle Raphael honked the horn. Matteo carefully placed the book in his backpack alongside Thomas's journal and his own. "Thank you, Dr. Harrison." The teacher nodded, eyes glistening again. "Thank you, Matteo, for helping me see again." On Sunday morning, Matteo and his mother waited outside their apartment building, dressed in their finest clothes. His mother had pressed her only good dress and woven flowers into her braid. Matteo wore a button-down shirt that had once belonged to his father, carefully altered by his mother's loving hands. When Dr. Harrison's sedan pulled up, Matteo's mother grew nervous, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. "Your teacher is really picking us up? For church?" "Yes, Mama, I told you. He invited us." She crossed herself quickly. "Dios mio, what kind of story did you write for this man?" Matteo smiled. "The true kind." Dr. Harrison stepped out of the car, wearing a suit that made him look less like the stern English teacher and more like an ordinary man seeking redemption. He extended his hand to Mateo's mother. "Senora Alvarez, I'm James Harrison. Your son has made quite an impression on me." She took his hand cautiously. "He is a good boy." "The best," Dr. Harrison agreed, opening the car door for them. "I think you'll like this congregation. They've helped many families new to the area." As they drove through Sunday morning streets, Mateo watched Dr. Harrison from the back seat. The teacher caught his eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. A different man than the one who had ignored him for 7 months. The church was a modest building with stained glass windows depicting the parable of the lost sheep. As they approached the entrance, Dr. Harrison hesitated, years of absence making him momentarily a stranger. Mateo, sensing his teacher's discomfort, did something bold. He reached out and took Dr. Harrison's hand, just as he used to do with his father when entering their church in Caracas. The gesture startled the teacher, but he gripped Mateo's hand tightly as they walked through the doors together. Inside, a woman with silver hair spotted Dr. Harrison and rushed forward, enveloping him in an embrace. "James! Oh my goodness, James! It's been so long!" She held him at arm's length, examining his face with motherly concern. "We've missed you terribly." "Hello, Margaret," Dr. Harrison said, his voice thick. "I've brought guests. This is Gloria Alvarez and her son Mateo. They're new to our community." Margaret turned to them with a warm smile. "Any friend of James is family to us. Come, services are about to begin." As they found seats in a pew near the back, whispers rippled through the congregation. Harrison is back. After all this time. Mateo could feel the weight of curious glances, but for once he wasn't invisible. He was the catalyst for something important. The service began with a hymn Mateo didn't recognize, but the melody was simple enough to follow. His mother's beautiful alto voice drew appreciative glances. Dr. Harrison didn't sing, but his lips moved silently with the familiar words. When the pastor spoke of homecoming and prodigal sons, Dr. Harrison's shoulders shook slightly. Without thinking, Mateo placed his small hand over his teacher's clenched fist. The man who had ignored him for 7 months turned his palm upward, gripping Mateo's hand like a lifeline. After the service, they were surrounded by church members eager to welcome them. Margaret organized a lunch invitation, and somehow, by early afternoon, Mateo found himself in the garden of an elderly couple's home, playing checkers with their grandson, while his mother chatted in a mixture of Spanish and English with several women from the congregation. Dr. Harrison sat nearby, deep in conversation with the pastor. Occasionally, he would glance over at Mateo with an expression of wonder, as if still coming to terms with how this 12-year-old immigrant had broken through his carefully constructed walls. As the afternoon waned, Dr. Harrison drove them home. Outside their apartment building, he turned to Mateo's mother. "Senora Alvarez, I run a tutoring program after school. With your permission, I'd like Mateo to join. His writing shows remarkable promise." Mateo translated the parts his mother didn't understand. Her face lit up with pride. "See, yes, of course. My Mateo, he is very smart." "Yes," Dr. Harrison agreed. "He is." He reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope. "The program includes a small scholarship. It would cover school supplies, proper uniforms, and some extracurricular activities." When Mateo translated this, his mother's eyes widened. No, we cannot accept money." "It's not charity," Dr. Harrison insisted gently. "It's an investment in talent. Mateo earned this." Later that evening, as Mateo prepared for bed, his mother sat beside him, stroking his hair. "What did you write that touched this man's heart so deeply?" Mateo considered the question. "I wrote about being invisible and how faith helps me believe I'm still seen." She kissed his forehead. "You have your father's heart and your grandmother's faith. A powerful combination." As she turned to leave, Mateo reached for Thomas's journal, still empty, waiting for words. "Mama, do you think it's strange that Dr. Harrison gave me his son's journal?" His mother paused in the doorway. "No, mijo. When we lose someone we love, we look for ways to keep their memory alive. Your teacher is giving his son's memory new life through you. She smiled softly. It's a sacred trust. The following weeks brought subtle but profound changes. In Dr. Harrison's classroom, Mateo was no longer invisible. The teacher called on him regularly, nodding encouragement when Mateo's accent thickened with nervousness. Twice a week, Mateo stayed after school for the writing workshop, which had grown to include 7 students from diverse backgrounds. In the hallways, Charlotte and her friends made space for him at their lunch table. The boy who had knocked away his books, David, grudgingly apologized after Dr. Harrison assigned a project requiring them to work together. "I didn't know," David muttered, not meeting Mateo's eyes. "About your dad and everything." Mateo accepted the awkward apology with grace beyond his years. "Now you do." 1 month after reading his journal entry aloud, Mateo arrived at school to find an announcement on the bulletin board. The St. Bartholomew Literary Magazine was sponsoring a contest, and Dr. Harrison had submitted Mateo's story, with his permission, for consideration. He won first place. At the small ceremony in the school auditorium, Mateo stood before the assembled students and faculty, clutching his certificate, while Dr. Harrison beamed from the front row. "Faith," Mateo said in his acceptance speech, "is believing you are seen when the world has turned away. But sometimes faith works both ways. Sometimes it helps others see you too." Later that day, Dr. Harrison presented him with a leather messenger bag containing a laptop, a donation from the school's alumni fund for promising writers. "For your next story," he said with a wink. That evening, Mateo finally opened Thomas's journal. On the first blank page, he began to write, "Dear Thomas, I never met you, but in a strange way, I know you. Your father sees you in me, which was painful for him at first. Now I think it brings him comfort. I want you to know that he still loves you very much. He keeps your picture in his desk drawer and touches it when he thinks no one is looking. I lost my father too. Maybe that's another reason your dad and I understand each other. I'm writing in your journal now because your father asked me to give it purpose. I hope that's okay with you. Sometimes I imagine you and my father meeting in heaven, sharing stories about us. I like to think you're both watching over us, seeing how your father and I are helping each other heal. I promise to use this journal well, to fill it with stories that would make you proud. And I promise to remind your father to keep breathing, even when it hurts. Your friend, Mateo." When he finished writing, Mateo felt a strange peace settle over him. He was no longer invisible. Dr. Harrison had seen him, and in seeing him, had begun to see himself again too. 3 months later, on the anniversary of Thomas's death, Dr. Harrison invited Mateo and his mother to join him at the cemetery. They stood together before the grave, Mateo's hand once again finding his teacher's. "I brought someone to meet you," Dr. Harrison said to the headstone. "He's helped me remember how to live again." As the teacher placed flowers on the grave, Mateo opened Thomas's journal, now half filled with his stories, prayers, and letters to the boy he'd never met. He read aloud the poem he had written for the occasion, his voice clear in the quiet cemetery. "Faith is the bridge between what was and what will be, a prayer whispered when no other words remain, the hand that finds yours in darkness, the breath that carries you when your legs give way. Faith is the invisible thread connecting strangers, weaving broken hearts into something whole again. It's the moment you realize you've never been alone, even when the whole world turned away." When he finished reading, Mateo looked up to find Dr. Harrison weeping openly, one hand on his son's headstone, the other still gripping Mateo's small fingers. His mother stood nearby, tears streaming down her face as she watched the English teacher finally release 7 years of bottled grief. "Thank you," Dr. Harrison whispered, pulling Mateo into an embrace, "for helping me remember that being seen, truly seen, is the greatest gift we can give each other. As they walked back through the cemetery, Dr. Harrison's arm around Mateo's shoulders, the setting sun cast long shadows across the graves. But for the first time in 7 years for one, and 7 months for the other, those shadows didn't feel like darkness closing in, but rather like the stretching hands of faith, reaching toward a future where neither would be invisible again.